The San Diego Padres, despite all the hype and everything, all the money spent, they've been a disaster. I've been talking about that all season. But on today's episode, very special guest, my buddy Marc Delucci, who covers the Giants, Giants insider for Fan Nation. Very cool stuff. We're going to be talking about last night's game a teensy little bit, but then diving deep into the economics of the sport, particularly with the Padres and Giants, and just how these two teams develop and build their teams completely differently. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, June 21st. As always, I am your host, with sometimes occasionally, but definitely not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can find me on Twitter at Javipeno. That's Javiipeno. If you don't like my tweets there, which totally fine, I usually try to make them a little bit separate. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's like the dog in the burning house meme. That's what my personal account looks like. If you follow me for Padres stuff, me just pretending nothing's happening. But if you want Padres live updates and me being sad, at LO_Padres, and also check out the YouTube if you want to see Pac-Man for Michael Waka or Fernando Tatis's bobblehead or whatever I'm wearing. And if you're just people really like YouTube podcasts, man. It's like a thing for people. It's like niche. People really enjoy it. Yeah.
Have you been capitalizing on it? Seems like they're boosting YouTube Shorts in the algorithm now too.
Yeah, a little bit there. Well? I think I've been thinking of doing Shorts more, maybe uploading some of my videos that I post on Twitter. Got to do that for sure. But today's episode, guys, is brought to you by Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Game Time. And that voice you heard, I've talked enough already, is Mr. Marc Delucci, a San Francisco Giants insider for Fan Nation, which is part of Sports Illustrated and stuff. He's written for a bunch of places before. He's written for SF Gate, doing journalistic stuff, much more journalistic than me and my clown hat, let me tell you. He's done a lot. He's in a fantasy baseball league too. He's absurd and he's Mad Delucci on Twitter. Marc, how are you doing, man? It's been a while.
You bring up fantasy baseball while you're clean sweeping me right now early this week. It's early. I got to come back in me, but I see, I appreciate the compliment right before you had to remind me that I'm like, again, I think it's what we're in a categories league. And I think it's currently like 7-1. You're on pace to clean sweep me this week. So,
yeah. And I also hate that league for a lot of reasons. One, because one of my closest friends run it, so I have to hate it. And two, because I don't know why we're changing up the statistics for how fantasy baseball works. It's called Fangraphs if you want to care about all that other stuff. But whatever, they're weird. Marc, man, I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a while because for those who don't follow Marc's work, I highly recommend it. He's also got a really nice economic slant on things because that's what he studied and that's what he knows. And it's interesting because our two teams, the Giants and the Padres, who have been facing each other, and last night was yet again another walk-off loss for the
somehow
Padres.
Less painful than the nights before, but
yeah, I know, right?
Somehow
last night featured Josh Hader, perhaps the single most dominant reliever, absent a couple seasons from
that man hates Oracle Park.
Yeah,
that man hates it because he was with the Brewers last year. He wasn't with the Padres when he had that implosion where he gave up like 8 runs. It was like the only 8 runs he'd given up all season, basically, for like a 6-month stretch. Yeah, that man despises the Giants.
But it's insane because that dude came into the game and walked in the game-winning run, but it was still not as horrible and depressing as Monday's game, I think, in a lot of ways. But I wanted to have your perspective on this because a lot of people keep asking me, why isn't this working for the Padres? And aside from just players not playing well, I think that there's a really interesting discussion to be had on just how different these two teams develop, and that it's not a coincidence in a lot of ways that the Giants keep finding players and the Padres are just hoping that Rougned Odor can somehow find the youth of his career. And it's actually hilariously enough for Odor worked a little bit. But first I wanted to ask you, you do cover the Giants and you go to the games. Couldn't be me, I guess, right? Because I'm in New Jersey. But you were at the game last night and the night before. What was kind of the atmosphere like? Because I know it must have been fun, but
it was fun. It was, I mean, again, for me writing my game story, trying to publish as soon as the last pitch happens, one of my writers, Natasha, was joking because she was working on an article. But
that,
you know, you can like, everyone sees each other's stuff sort of when they're working on it. So she was just seeing like the headline like keep changing every 2 seconds because I've mad scramble as it happened. But no, it was really exciting. And the Giants, you know, it's no secret. I mean, you know, they're not alone post pandemic. A lot of teams have seen attendance hits, but it's been, I think, particularly stark with the Giants because, you know, really, I mean, obviously you have the new stadium in 2000 and Barry Bonds. So that obviously gives you this huge, you know, fan base boost that'll come with that. And then obviously, you know, you have a little dip post Bonds, and then you have Buster Posey emerge 3 World Series in 5 years, or 3 World Series in 5 seasons, and, you know, make the playoffs in 2016. And they keep this core, Posey, you know, Crawford again, who's still there, Belt, all these guys. So, you know, they run a sellout streak, I want to say into 2019, basically on the heels of that run. And then it ends in 2019 as they're kind of faltering, but they're still in the high 30s, low 40s. But again, that was kind of, they were probably about to see a pretty big crash anyway. And then the pandemic happened. They went 500 during the pandemic. Posey, you know, then they come back in 2021, back from the pandemic, win 107 games. And I think they have a chance to build momentum. And then last year, they obviously have a really disappointing season after Buster Posey retires too. So just all those things. So, you know, they're in this 9-game winning streak. Obviously it was 7 after sweeping the Dodgers over the weekend on the start of the series on Monday. And fans should show up. They're back in the mid 30s. So you just have that kind of environment, which is super fun. I've been surprised. Again, I've not been someone who's gone to a lot of Giants games over the years. For those not familiar, I was born and raised in Hawaii, so not exactly a lot of big league team access. But I was surprised at like Padres fan turnout, which has made the environment and frankly, just the distaste that these teams had. Like it's like, I was like, oh, these fan bases have decided to not, the Giants have decided to not like the Padres in a way I didn't expect. And again, I understand 2010 and Matt Latos, but it's like Padres beat the Dodgers last year. I thought y'all are happy for them, but no, they've been booing Machado, booing Tatis. There was a contingent of fans who were like chanting for Ha-Sung Kim, which then made the Giants fans respond by booing Ha-Sung Kim because I don't think they understood. It was like, looked like people with like Korean flags and stuff who'd shown up. People were like, why is this guy getting chants in our ballpark? So that's been super fun. And again, it's just, you know, you don't want it to happen if you're the team, but there is nothing that gets like a home crowd more fired up than a comeback, right? Than like falling a bit behind early, having a reliever come in and shove for a few innings and, you know, incrementally come back in it late game. Again, 2 back-to-back walk-off wins, back-to-back 9th inning rallies.
All right. Easy, easy.
You know, it's just, so it's absolutely been an electric atmosphere. It's 2 games too. Again, like as stressed as I am because I'm working during it and amped up. It's like I'm leaving the ballpark. Like, wow, that's a super memorable experience.
The deadline speed writing game is not for the faint of heart, but sometimes it's not nearly as bad as you think it's going to be. But when you finally get it done, it does feel pretty good. You feel energized and whatnot. The very few times I've done that. My thing, and again, like this is just my standard for myself, is like I want to hit publish on final pitch every time, which gives me more work. So that means I'm pre-writing that. Like part of the reason Natasha sees the headline keep changing is what happens in the bottom of the 9th of the tie game is the headline is changing to whoever's at bat walk-off hit. So that I can publish. And Mondays was all over the place. You had like the Padres take the lead. They're up by a lot. And then you have the whole Tim Hill is just mowing down the Giants lineup. And then it's just like, all right, this is over. And then of course,
and it was like comeback falls short in the 9th, and then it's like getting ready for a walk-off hit in the 9th, and then Yaz homer. So even I have to last minute scramble to get the score changed because it's not 5-4, it's 7-4.
It's 7-3, right? Yeah, exactly. And some people might immediately be hating, but I will say, first of all, I meant to text you, get ready, because Luis Garcia entered the game. I forgot. I was like, get ready. In my head, I was like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I was just very, and then of course Padres discourse on Twitter and just in media as well, asking Bob Melvin questions about it. You guys can go check out my episode from yesterday, my thoughts on that. I'm going
to pop my 2 cents in here on the hater thing, and this is mostly a question that honestly you don't even have to answer. I'll just pop this. You can throw this in a short, you know, get that engagement, you know. But I'm actually, again, there's mixed sentiment. I think people misread. I think there is a bit more evidence out there that back-to-back games do cause pitchers to deteriorate and have some long-term consequences. And Hader had pitched on back-to-back over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That said, so, again, I kind of get it on Monday. What I don't get is why yesterday, if Hader was available in the 9th inning, he doesn't start the 9th inning. Because I understand the sentiment of like, well, it's a tie game on the road, so we don't want to burn our closer. And that's fine. I get that. But then when it's a tie game and the bases are loaded or the runners on first and second in the 9th inning, I don't get why that increases the chances to use Hader. I think honestly, because honestly, the way Hader pitched made me say, oh no, they knew what they were doing on Monday. He clearly is, like he's still dealing with it command wise after that weekend. He needs a bit more time to recover. So that's where the Tuesday outing was actually the one that made me kind of furrow my brow a bit, because again, look, these coaches want to use their pitchers as much as they can, particularly their best ones. Like, I don't think they are dogmatic in not using Hader on Monday. I think if they're not doing it, it's because either he says he can't go or they have reason to believe he can't. It's the thing that confuses me is why are you, if you're going to use him on Tuesday, use him to start the bottom half of the inning. Or once there's 2 runners on with less than 2 outs, and then, let Nick Martinez lose it. And then you don't, that part was confusing me because you burn Hader and then you go to the extras and guess what? The Giants are going to throw Camilo in the 10th. And then you got to have Hader go multiple innings. That's the one that kind of perplexed me a bit more. But anyway, that's kind of a side note.
Mark, I think a lot of it comes down to just Padres ineptitude in general. And we got to talk about that and more in deep detail and whatnot, and kind of give your perspective on things. But before we do that, guys, really quickly, got to talk to you about Game Time. Look, if you're Mark and you're trying to make it to the ballpark at the Giants game and you want to, maybe you got to get last minute tickets. You know what I mean? And Game Time has you covered there. Let me tell you. And if you cancel for any reason, maybe Mark, oh, you know what? I just heard that some pitcher that stinks is pitching. There was a scratch start and he says, I'm out of here. Don't worry. They actually give you your money back and whatnot. They give you event cancellation kind of bonuses or whatever you want to call it. I don't know the right event cancellation protection. That's the
protection
word.
Bonus. They pay you to cancel your ticket.
They pay you to cancel. Forget about.
I don't want to screw up Javi's ad money. It's not what they're saying.
No, don't worry.
Protection.
Yeah, it's okay. They don't mind. I mean, I have a hat on my head right now. Like, I don't think they really care what most of the time. But guys, go check it out. Forget planning months in advance. They also give you these little seat views, which I'm a visual learner, so that's very helpful. And just in general, it's great. And it's for not just sports. It's called Game Time, but they got theater stuff. They got all sorts of stuff that you can go check out. So be sure to do that. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, go check that out, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. That is Game Time.
Break.
And we're back, everybody. My very inconspicuous sipping of water before I get back.
Again, if we weren't as close as we were, I would have filled the air in like the efforts of good podcasting, because I know you so well. I'm like, no, I'm going to let Javi sit in this one for a bit and have a good laugh.
Yeah, there you go. It's what I do. Mark, man, look, so we talked about these 2 games. That's kind of, but I think that's a great point. I know I got mini ratioed on my Padres account in the sense that I didn't really necessarily disagree with the idea of being like, let's get Luis Garcia into things. He's been good before. The sinker, his slider, people are batting like 100 against it. So obviously it's not working this year, and hitters seem to be waiting on it and just waiting on him throwing his sinker, which is less effective. But I was like, okay, I can understand that. It reminded me, and I talked about it, of like the Mike Clevenger, Sean Manaea, who's now a Giant, by the way, for people who might have forgotten, where they threw them out in the playoffs and all they had to do was not do what they did in the playoffs, which is not even get like a single out and get lit up against the Phillies. Luis Garcia did the one thing you couldn't do. Wild pitches galore, first and third, nobody out. It was just nightmare city. And then, of course, everyone gets mad at Melvin. But I agree. It's very much like commit one way or the other. Are you going to use Hader? Then use them. I mean, go ahead. I thought it was weird how many people were messaging me about how are you going to pay someone if he can't pitch 3 days in a row? And I'm like, I don't think that's a standard. Am I wrong that that's not a standard for even the Velociraptor, Camilo Duvall type of closers?
Well, I will say they do that with Duvall, and I'm not big on it. I mean, I again, like here's the way I put it, right? Like each guy's different. Like it's like, I mean, like again, I don't know the specifics. And again, I'm not projecting it, but look, Hader knows he's about to be a free agent. Like it could be a thing that him and his agent told the Padres, like, look, you ain't doing to us what the Cubs did with Chapman and burning out his arm right before he might leave. Like I'm not saying that I don't have any inside info on that. I'm just saying is like there's a lot of dynamics in play, and again, I'm a bit more, So I think that plays into it. And again, like guys just feel off or whatever. Like again, it's not just 2 days back to back. There was travel involved, obviously. Like again, short trip, but still you get on the plane. Like again, I think that's one of the things that being there day to day, there's a lot more behind the scenes that's happening when it comes to like which guys are available, which guys do we want to use, which guys do we want to avoid using, and ultimately the reality is bullpens are built on depth. You can't have you can have a bad bullpen with Mariano Rivera if no one else is good. And you can have a great bullpen without an elite closer if you have a solid closer and a bunch of really good setup options, right? And I think that's the Padres find themselves in a position that every team pretty much has found them in at some point, right? Which is, Hader's their best option and he's elite, but you have to be able to trust other guys. You have to be able to have some other semblance of setup options. And that's the issue to me, right? Like it's again, like, sure, it might have cost the Padres a game, but ultimately if they win that one on Monday, then Hader's definitely not available yesterday and they lose on Tuesday. And then what are they, 500? Like it's, again, like I don't want to undersell the meaning of these two games, but let's be frank here. That's not why the Padres are, if they win on Monday and lose on Tuesday, we're having a pretty similar conversation right now about how the Padres had a disappointing season and what's going wrong with the Padres.
And depth is one of those things. And the Pirates bullpen has been good this year. Let's be clear. That's another thing that I want to point out is third best ERA amongst bullpens. It might be down now after these past 2 games, but still it's up there. It's been great. Starting pitching has been great. But it feels like when you compare it to the Giants, and I remember last year or maybe a year or so ago, I forgot when it was that you brought up this point, but I am for some reason, especially on my network, Locked On, the only person afraid aside from the Giants host and that respects the Giants. I don't know what it is, but my thing was I saw that team take Darren Ruff and turn him into Bonds again. I saw Brandon Crawford, who has never been that positive of an at bat, maybe a 103 WRC plus. I don't have the numbers in front of me. And then all of a sudden he looks like he's like 6th in MVP one year.
Right. Solid player to MVP,
exactly.
Like legitimate MVP caliber player. Yeah.
And they do all these things. And I'm like, they got my favorite free agent this offseason, Michael Conforto. And then, and some of the other guys, Alex Cobb, I thought he was going to be good this year, the expected stats. And I think he got pretty unlucky last year. You have Logan Webb, just these, it's all B quality players. And there's not like a single D- guy who's killing your team or killing a side of your team, like say the Padres have with Trent Grisham, who's a good defensive player, but can't hit. And I think that that's what's so interesting is that you and I both, I think that, and I've been talking about this on my show, is there's such a misconception about, in my opinion, what it takes to win a World Series. And everyone keeps looking at Cleveland and Milwaukee and Tampa every now and then where, hey, well, those teams win a lot of games. It's like, yeah, but then what happens in the playoffs? You're losing the story. And I think with the Giants, they tried to do that too. Don't get me wrong. Correa obviously being the big thing that happened. And then Aaron Judge, they were after too. But like that also makes you wonder how they would look with that superstar to kind of.
I know.
Like
can you imagine?
Force, right?
Can you imagine where they'd be? I mean, again, they wouldn't have Conforto, who's been good for them, but still, imagine where they'd be if Judge was in right field, left field, and Conforto. Or, I mean, again, even frankly, as much as Correa has been a disappointment in Minnesota, he's been better than Brandon Crawford. Like it would still be like the Giants would be a better team for sure. Yeah, I think it gets at, and sorry to cut you off, but I think I know where you're going, and is the interesting thing about. I think generally speaking, in the regular season, depth is what wins because injuries pile up.
Yeah.
And in the postseason, this is sort of my very shorthand, very cut to the chase, simplistic. Depth wins in the regular season, particularly in the lineup, and the best starting rotation wins in the playoffs. Like that's sort of my very simplistic approach to like, if I had to make a prediction and I didn't have time and I didn't know teams very well, if I'm picking regular season, I'm going to look at how deep your team is. And if I'm looking at the postseason, I'm looking at starting rotations. And the thing about the Giants is that they've done a really good job at finding depth, right? Like I actually think the thing about the Giants and Padres is we talk about the very different approaches AJ Preller and Farhan Zaidi have taken in building their teams. I think both of them could learn from each other. I actually think like what Preller has done incredibly well is identify talent, build a strong farm system, and capitalize on it for star players, or at least attempt to capitalize on it and take chances with it. And Zaidi has done an amazing job, incredible job at finding borderline all-stars, all-star caliber players for nothing in significant trade capital. They have acquired their starting infield right now. 3 of their starting infielders who are probably, again, if it weren't for injuries, frankly, all 3 might be deserving of all-star nods, although probably Lamont Wade will be the only one who wins. Lamont Wade Jr. at first base, who's been the best leadoff hitter in baseball, one of the top 5 first basemen in baseball this season. Tyro Estrada at second base, and J.D. Davis at third base. They've acquired those 3 guys for Darren Ruff, who was cut by the Mets after half a season, Sean Anderson, who was designated for assignment by the Twins after half a season, and cash considerations. Like, that is an unparalleled thing around baseball right now. Like 3 dudes who had made the big leagues. All 3 had appeared in the big leagues. All 3 had like flashes. JD Davis obviously was really good with the Mets, actually. But Tyro had flashes early in his career with the Yankees. Lamont had flashes early in his career with the Twins. And they got them for very little because those other teams didn't believe them to be significant pieces anymore. And they now are 3/4 of a incredible infield. Like, that's like, if the Padres just did that twice, right? Or just did have one of those guys, think about the lineup depth. Like, the problem for the Padres is that top 4 and the top 5 in that lineup is impressive. And that bottom 4, that is woof. Like, there's just a lot of holes in that lineup. And I mean, frankly, you could say something similar about the starting rotation, right? Like, that was the one thing about the Padres going into the year. I was comparing them to the Giants. I was like, the Giants have 9 dudes who I think like are viable big league starters coming into the year. Between the big league guys they signed, and I'm a farm system head. Like, I thought guys like Tristan Beck and Keaton Wynn, who the Padres have been on the wrong end of the last couple of days, I saw them coming up the pipeline. They still have Kyle Harrison, who's probably the best pitching prospect in baseball down at AAA. Like, they had a lot of starting pitching depth. I looked at the Padres and I was like, is Julio Teheran their 6th best starter coming into the year? Like, it's rough. Like, and like, it's just like, I was like, man, if the Padres get hit with like 2 injuries, like, I thought the rotation was what was going to do the Padres in. But what I didn't realize, what I didn't look closely enough and looking back, is their lineup was just as weak. In fact, their lineup was even thinner. And so that's the thing I worry about for the Padres, because I still think there's a good team in here. I still think they'll have a hot stretch and at the minimum push for the wild card. And I think they end up finding their way in. I don't think the Marlins are sticking around necessarily. I think the NL is super weak. But the one thing I worry about for the Padres is they're sitting here below 500 and they've gotten good starting pitching. They've gotten solid bullpen work, despite Musgrove's injury even, right? Like their pitching staffs has done pretty well. And so my concern for the Padres is, let's say the lineup figures it out. Let's say Machado gets out of the little skiddies in. Let's say a Cronenworth, an Odor, or Gary Sanchez, whatever. Like, they like get hot and sustain it and the lineup comes deep. But that's when I worry. And then it's just like the no good, very bad season, when it's like you're not hitting when the pitching's going well, and then when the hitting figures it out, the pitching's just been carrying too much of a load and it kind of falters, and that's how you end up on the wrong side of things. And again, I think the Giants will see. And again, I think frankly we're going to see a little AJ Preller and Farhan Zaidi this deadline. I still think it's going to come down to I do wonder about guys like Wade, guys like Estrada, Davis, as good as they've been. There are tiers of stars, right? And I think where that gets exposed, I think this is where teams like you mentioned, some of those other teams with kind of that do well in the regular season consistently, but kind of falter. And I think we could honestly probably put, like, not right now, but the A's sort of historically are the perfect example of this, right? Like, they'll find their way into the playoffs and then they won't seem to get there. And often I think it's because they kind of have those those contender teams were like full of B tier stars, really good players. Like, I don't want to undersell that those were good players, but in the playoffs, when you aren't facing that 4th and 5th starter, right? You aren't getting the Giants aren't getting to face Luis Garcia in the 9th inning in the playoffs, right? The Giants aren't going to, teams aren't going to give you that same workaround. And I think that's what sort of separates, the sort of cream of the crop from really good players, like don't want to undersell. They have incredible value to a team, but what gets you over the top in the playoffs? And that's why I think the Giants were right to target Judge. I think they were right to target Correa. And I do think my criticism of Zaidi has been, I haven't thought he's been greedy enough, because I'm like, you're so good at getting depth. Let's get aggressive. You should be more aggressive in free agency. You should be more aggressive on the trade market. Because even if the deal blows up, even if it isn't one that works out, you're good enough that you can probably find a way to make it work, find a role for that player, or even find a replacement cheaper down the line. Again, why are you letting Kevin Gossman walk? Have him and Logan Webb and Carlos Rodon in your rotation in 2022. Like things like that is where I've wanted Zaidi to have a little more of Preller, to go, yeah, we don't need Xander Bogaerts, but I'm going to go get him. At the same time, Preller's needed a little more of Zaidi. I think I need to be more hyper cognizant of depth I need on this team. There is, I think, something to be said for, and again, it's too early to tell. I know people are going to say the Bogaerts deal is a sham. Look, it's year one of the deal. People were saying Marcus Semien and Corey Seager were bad signings at this point last season with Texas. Yeah. And look what's happening right now. It's way too, I think Bogaerts will be fine. But I think it is fair to say, looking at this roster, but man, it does feel like the Padres had a roster where you already have Soto, Machado. You're going to get Tatis back. You might have been better off giving three guys 10 million a year deals to fill three holes. Again, I think the Bogaerts deal was about them not having, frankly, faith in Tatis. That's what I think that was about. I think they didn't. I think if they knew Tatis was going to be this good, I don't think they signed Bogaerts. I think the Bogaerts move was motivated by their concerns that they were going to have to either move off of Tatis or he was just going to become dead money. And so I think that's kind of if I were, again, this is outside looking in, but I think that was an internal misevaluation they made that, again, right now, when it's like, man, we probably could have signed a starter and signed maybe a more viable catcher, or like a second baseman, just to give us frankly, a first baseman. Walking into the year with Cronenworth at first base rather than a super utility is just like things like that. It's
a lot of great points, man. I think that for me, and my takeaway is that there is no deal from the Padres absent the Nola one, that when it happens, I would still defend it. I'll even still defend. I'm not talking about all the other stuff, but I'll just defend the baseball side of the Mike Clevenger trade. I'll defend the baseball side of, heck, Mitch Moreland when they got him in 2020. I'll defend those. I just think that it's all of them coalescing together without a vision of depth, the way that the Giants.
Again, you can die if you drink too much water, right?
Yeah.
There is nothing in this world, metaphorically, ideologically, or tangibly, physically, that there is not too much of. There can be and again, that's been my criticism of Zaidi is like, okay, I love what you're doing with depth, but hey, everything's not about the edge of 40-man roster.
Get the big one. Go get the big one.
Like you can make your life easier too. And again, that's where I think it's so interesting, because the strengths of Preller and the strengths of Zaidi are different. And they have different weaknesses in that sense. But if one thing is going to, again, but that comes back to sort of my tenet at the beginning of this point, which is, but in baseball, generally betting on depth is a better move, just because injuries happen. It's a 162 game season. And you're going to face a lot of bad pitching. You're going to face bad teams. You're going to, that's where you don't, again, not every 90 win team is built this, not every division winner is built the same. Some are like 88 game winners who basically get crushed by about 500 teams, but do their work against bad teams. And then others are kind of high variance and, go up and down. And so what depth does is it means you're going to, I say this and the Giants have already done this, but generally speaking, depth is what helps you make sure you don't lose to when you get 100 loss team, you're playing, you're going to take 2 out of 3. You're going to get those sweeps. And again, star power helps, but there's only so much one player can do. Again, when
absent some of the craziest, the A-Rod in the playoffs that one year.
Seattle, again, the playoffs is different, right? Because it's one game, right? Because every game has so much value, and because the difference between a star and a regular player is larger in the postseason than the regular season. Because again, everyone's on their A game because you're facing better pitching. So if you have, the reason a regular player isn't a star is probably because there's some hole in their swing, or maybe a lack of power, or maybe they have a little bit more swing and miss. Well, that's going to be exposed in the playoffs a bit more, where the star, where again,
when you're facing, when you have to face whatever the heck, like the Rays rotation each game, right? So it can be tough. I think that, again, just to circle around to my point about how, like, I don't hate any of the signings. The problem is that there was, like, I just don't think they need to do all of them. If we head into the season, like what you mentioned, where it's like, you know what? I kind of like Tatis, Soto, Machado. I think we're good on stars. Let's do the other parts now. Let's do the tertiary building. Let's do the Zaidi stuff. And then the opposite goes for the Giants, where it's like, all right, we have the tertiary. Let's go get the inner core. So that was my take, where my thing, I also think the same thing goes for Soto, where if you're signing Xander Bogaerts, do you still want to do that deal? And maybe if you knew what Tatis was going to be, and you're like, all right, cool. And I'm not saying I think CJ Abrams or Rob Hassel or James Wood are the second coming, but rather, what if you only have to trade one of those guys to get something good that would help this team right now? That's my thing, is I think that there's been a improper allocation of resources for the Padres as opposed to the Giants, who haven't gotten the big fish yet, although at least they tried. Right? Like, it looks like they clearly tried.
I got questions. I still got questions.
Oh, you got questions?
I got questions. Look, I know they tried and they were definitely in on Judge. It's just, I don't think we will ever know what happened with Correa, with the Giants and Mets. And I think there's, again, because obviously Boris isn't a trustworthy narrator and he's the only one who's going to speak publicly about it. But I do. Right, exactly. I don't got a problem with Boris. I think he gets undue hate. But
he's doing his job.
Exactly. I want Scott Boris on my side. The thing that, everyone sort of said the Giants were validated when the Mets did the same thing, but it seemed like the Mets deal was one that Cohen made and the front office immediately didn't like, and so I'm almost it's a case of, I think a lot of people were like, the Giants were validated by the Mets doing the same thing as the Giants, so Correa was obviously damaged goods. I'm not as convinced there wasn't internal fighting within the Mets to try to get Cohen to change his mind, if that makes sense. And so that's just where, again, I don't know if there was sort of a similar story with the Giants, that maybe they were looking for a reason, like, some people were looking for a reason, and maybe ownership was pushing it. I don't have any inside information on that. I'm just saying, again, like this offseason broke pattern for the Giants, right? They win 107 games and they sit out the 2021 offseason, right? They basically let Kevin Gausman walk, again, sign Carlos Rodon to replace him, who again worked out well, but why not get greedy? Why not do both? They don't go for a Simeon or a Seager, who you can imagine right now in this lineup. You know what I mean? Like, and so, basically the only aggressive play they made under Zaidi up to last offseason was Bryce Harper. And even then they were a late entrance and they made an offer that was less than the Phillies. Well, it's like when you're making an offer that's less when you're entering, again, the
Chris Bryant trade a little bit.
Right, but they let him walk. And again, I'm not saying that was a bad move, right? It was a rental. I think Zaidi is going to be very aggressive at the deadline. I think he is going to make, I think partly just because the Giants, frankly, might have one of the 5 best systems right now. And even if you don't count them, like Casey Schmidt and Patrick Bailey aren't prospects anymore in like ranking sense, but are as trade chips potentially. Luis Matos is still a potential prospect, but I think he's going to be very aggressive on the trade front, and I think we're going to see a little Preller on that side of things this year.
The battle,
exactly.
Shams versus Woj. No, give me Zaidi.
and Friedman's going to get in there too. No, and Arizona's got. I mean, the NL West is going to be really fun. It's going to be really fun.
Wild West tons will be.
Because I would bet a lot of money this is the division where Ohtani's going to play next year.
Yeah. See. So I go back and forth on that. I'm not going to make this too much about Ohtani. My take is, I think Steve Cohen had a lot of fun watching the World Baseball Classic. That's my take. That's my take. It's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. Yeah.
I think the thing I'll say is I think Ohtani's the type of guy who there ain't going to be a money limit to anyone pretty much. And I think he's just going to want to stay on the West Coast. But again, I'm pretty confident he's going to be in the NL West. I don't know how the Padres find the money, but I think Preller's going to do everything he can do to try. I think the Giants are going to try, and the Dodgers are the favorites by now for pretty obvious reasons.
Especially with the players poll.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to ask you is this, and I alluded to this earlier, but like a couple years ago, I think this was after. I'm going to say this is after the Tatis extension, and then when they had traded for Snell and Darvish, which everything. All right, we're not talking about the players, but you had brought up this idea of the Padres are spending a lot of money on their players. What about the organization? The Giants famously have so many coaches. That's what everybody talked about. Gabe Kapler loves talking about that when he won Manager of the Year 2 years ago. They won the 107 games. They have all these different hitting coaches and whatnot. And you were talking to me about that. And it's funny because then later that year, the Athletic article on the Padres and how Preller is a micromanager, but do they allocate that money, which don't get me wrong, I love the talent, but are you also paying people good floor salaries? Are you bringing in good analysts and whatnot? And it seems like that is a giant difference that I think just objectively is where the Giants are stronger. At least we could argue about the building philosophies and how they learn from each other, but what is kind of the Giants thing? Because is that true? Like, are they investing more in being like, let's actually have a good staff here that can make players better? Because my other thing with the Padres is every player they bring in either stays good or whatever level they're at or gets worse. Absent maybe Joe Musgrove and technically Rougned Odor. Like the Giants, JD Davis has gotten better. Matos or not Matos. Lamont
Wade, Estrada, all these guys, for sure.
All these guys. Jack Peterson, even. I know he's flawed defensively and all that, but he can hit the heck out of the ball as he did in the series. What is that kind of like? Do you see that kind of difference?
I think that I would. Yeah. So in terms of, again, there's two parts, right? There's the financial and the personal investment, right? Like in terms of just like relationship building and being fun to work for, or people liking to work for you.
Yeah.
Financially, I would bet the Giants are doing more. I mean, again, that was something that Sabian and Evans do not get enough credit for. That was something they were kind of, I think, a bit ahead of the curve on. Evans in particular, as much as his tenure on the win-loss scale, and there were some bad trades in there, don't get me wrong. His tenure, he actually kind of started to turn the tide, and like we're heavily investing in player development and revamping our international free agency side on the minor league side. You know, I think again, to Preller's credit, like, yeah, he's traded a lot of good players, but that's because the Padres keep churning out these good prospects. Like again, they got some more in Salas and Merrill. Like exactly. I think, you know,
Salas, 16-year-old.
Yeah, I was gonna say again, Merrill is a guy. I'm a bit lower on him, but I can tell you this: I'm on the Baseball prospect staff, and people over there love Jackson Merrill. Yeah. So.
Okay, that's the way to put it. Look, I agree.
Let me put it this way: is again the stuff that came out. Let me rephrase this into something you can use. Is this live streaming?
No, it's not live streaming. It's just we're just recording it.
Yeah. But I realize I think that was off the record. So, let me see a way to phrase this. I think both Preller and Zaidi are in a camp where there tends to be, they are very dogmatic in their approaches, and they're going to, and it's sort of their way or the highway. I think both Zaidi and Preller get those criticisms when you talk to baseball people. But the thing that it seems, and again, the Giants, to be fair, have had a good amount of turnover this past offseason, so I don't want to undersell that. But the Giants, I think, I've seen less turnover on that side than the Padres over the years. And so, again, I don't know. Again, people can leave for a lot of reasons. It could be because people are getting promoted. It could be, you know, because they're having a good time or whatever. But there's, yeah. So I think that's a question I kind of have when it comes to the behind the scenes stuff. And again, I also wonder. Again, I'm not a big team chemistry guy, but it does seem like the Padres have acquired, there's been a lot of sort of guys over the years who it's been like, they acquire that guy and it's like, oh, that's a guy who has some story with some maybe baggage, right? And I wonder too, if there's a cost to that in terms of like, you know, there's something to be said for like when dudes gel, it makes it easier. And I think there's been some guys who are, you know, abrasive personalities. Again, you mentioned Clevenger. We could talk about Tommy Pham, who, again, you mentioned Jock Peterson. You know, and I do wonder, if maybe they're just not valuing, if maybe there's some value in sort of trying to build a sort of more synergistic environment. And again, I'm not in that locker room. I'm kind of speaking out of turn there. This is just speculation. But I think there might be something to be said about sort of, again, it's the problem that a lot of front office people have, right? Is the human side matters, right? Like the reason, like it is, as much as fans want to act like it doesn't matter and all these guys are machines and dehumanize players, like there is a reason Darren Ruff, even with the Brewers, even in a short time with the Giants after he got cut by the Mets, was not a great player again, but was not the train wreck he was in New York. And Darren talked about, like, his family was on the West Coast, and that made things difficult. And then he kind of got in his own head, and there was the pressure of the trade, and then the fan base is on you, and like that gets tough. And he just struggled with it. And it's like he candidly talked about that. And again, that's a real thing players go through. And fine, if you're a fan, you don't want to care about that. That's fine. But if you work for a team, you better care about that. If you work for a team, you better care about that. If you work for a team, you better have ways to deal with that and address that. And again, I'm using Ruff as an example, but we can talk about other guys over the years who it's just, they don't get along with their teammates, or they don't enjoy spending time with guys, or, like going to the ballpark is just kind of a drag. They're doing, it feels more like a job. And so, all those things can play a role. Again, I don't know what's what that environment is like inside the Padres locker room or what it's been. But when you have a team that has as much talent, even with questions about depth, and again, like you're saying, guys who seem to pretty consistently be performing better when they leave or before than when they're in the organization, it's reasonable to ask, well, why are they doing that? Why is that happening? And maybe it's and again, that could be financial investment in training staff and scouting. It could be personnel turnover, or it could be just not doing a good enough job to put those guys in positions to succeed.
Absolutely. And just to wind it down, it's almost like, in a more simple vernacular, like is this fantasy baseball way of building the team the way the Padres do, just getting crazy stars and whatnot, not necessarily isn't necessarily sustainable or going to be something that can work. I don't know. And again, I still think that they should spend money. We both agree on that. Every team should. My takeaway, my analogy lately has been with football, that it's harder to win when you have to finally pay your quarterback, but it's even harder to win when you don't have the quarterback. So that's kind of my perspective, is it's harder to win the big World Series and whatnot. Stop letting people who hype up who's a breakout team this year that's like minor or whatever, like the Reds. Everyone's going to talk about how the Diamondbacks aren't spending a lot right now. The Reds. Yeah, guess what? I have breaking news. They're probably not going to win the World Series, because that's just how the history of the sport seems to go. So again, it can be frustrating. And
again, this is the thing. When the team wins the World Series, you as a fan should not care what the payroll is. They won the World Series. And it's exactly. Like, it's not all that means the lower the payroll is. It just means the owner and front office did a better job exploiting the labor market to pay their players less. That does nothing for anyone but ownership on that front. Do you think Seidler pulls the plug if they miss the playoffs this year, though? That's, I think, the question for the Padres.
I think if they miss the playoffs, I think Melvin's done. I can't make up my mind on Preller. I go back and forth. It's every other day. I don't mean pull the plug on people. I mean pull the plug on money.
Oh,
on money?
Like if he says
no, I don't know if they can anyway. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
I guess theoretically you could go out and be like, all right, who wants Machado? Who wants Tatis?
Or we're just not going to extend Soto.
There's only three. Yeah, maybe I think that's the bigger thing, is that they won't extend Soto, but I don't know. I think they're going to fire people first before. It sounds that's like Seidler's like, I want to go for it. And also the Chargers aren't here anymore, and we're the only major league team.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean,
so,
that'd be my biggest concern as a fan. It's just, I hope he keeps doing it.
Are they going to be like, we're done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. We tried spending money. Now get me a Wall Street hedge fund.
Yeah, we'll see if they continue it, because every time I say let's go sign a Conforto, then they do a Bogarts, right? But Mark, this has been a blast. A lot of fun diving deep into the Padres, getting your perspective on the Padres and the Giants. Hopefully we'll do this again whenever the heck they play, and hopefully I'll be happier and I won't be wearing this hat anymore. I basically have said
I'll be wearing the
I'll
hat.
stop
You know
wearing
what?
it
I'm
once
going to
I hit
say it next
500.
time I'm on the podcast. Remind me, I will wear a hat of some kind. It will not be that hat, but it will be a hat of
Solidarity. That's gonna be a lot of fun. But do you have any last things you want to plug for the good people before we close this thing out?
Just give me a follow over on Twitter at Mad Delucci, MadDelucchi. It's kind of the only it's where I it's where you'll be able to find links to most of my work. I'm as Javi mentioned earlier, I'm a Giants beat writer over at Giants Baseball Insider, but I also write around. I cover the Golden State Warriors, San Francisco 49ers over at SB Nation, and as I mentioned, Baseball Prospectus prospect staff. So if you like sports, particularly if you like sports in the Bay Area and you like a little taste of economics and leftist politics, you hop on over for a good time.
Absolutely. Everybody go check that out. Everybody, though, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. I know it's a bar, right? I go pretty hard with that one.
I mean, right now, that's not a high bar, but you know.
Yeah, I know. I know. Good point. But everybody, remember, as always, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful. My fire faithful homies, take